The last people outside her home to have heard Ilonka Cann's voice were her parents. It was Memorial Day weekend, 1970. During the call, the young mother, who had moved hundreds of miles from home, told them that she missed them, and they were quietly making arrangements for her to visit in June. She never made that trip. By the following day, 22-year-old Ilonka Cann had vanished from the rural Pennsylvania farmhouse where she lived with her husband and young son. More than 50 years later, there's still no sign of her. This is her story.
Hi, I'm Vanessa.
And I'm Amy.
And you're listening to She Goes by Jane. At the end of this episode and every episode, we will be joined by a special guest who will read an original poem by Amy Baker about the women we're featuring.
Hi, Vanessa.
Hi, Amy.
Vanessa, we have an interesting story here. It is 50 years old. So the disappearance happened now quite a while ago. But there have been recent developments in this case that have fascinated me. And I'm hoping to see even more developments soon, is what I would say.
How recent?
2024.
Oh, okay.
So recently there's been some movement in her case in regards to her disappearance and understanding of what might have happened to her, which we're going to dive into here. And I was astounded with the direction this has taken over time.
Are we going to talk about what's happening right now with the case, or would that be an update in the future?
So we're going to talk about where it has left off as of 2024.
Okay.
There has not been a lot of publicity about it since, and I suspect there's probably some behind-the-scenes movement. But if there are developments in the future, we will absolutely cover that here.
Okay, that sounds great.
The other thing that I wanted to remind you, Vanessa, is we have had so many new listeners.
We have. It's been amazing. It's
Right.
been completely amazing.
I am so excited every time I log into our social media and see people commenting, and I see the download numbers growing. It's just really heartening that people are hearing these stories.
I've been seeing a lot of shares and stuff like that too, and that's amazing because that means they're feeling some sort of connection towards these stories and these women, and they're wanting to share that with other people. So that's amazing.
Exactly. One of the things, though, that I wanted to remind our new listeners is that Vanessa and I have revitalized our Patreon account.
Mm-hmm.
It's the She Goes by Jane podcast Patreon, and we're sharing some stuff there that, is impossible to share here on the podcast. So right now, you can listen to our episodes early, ad-free on Patreon. Also available is printable copies of my poems. I can't release all the poems because I don't own the copyright to all of my poems, but all of the new poems are released there as a printable copy. So you can print, you can share.
Which is very, very nice.
Yes. Yeah. And also right now, Vanessa and I are writing letters about our thoughts about the podcast, but we were actually just talking about the possibility of moving to having a little bonus audio content about our thoughts on the podcast instead.
Like a little after talk about each episode. I like the idea of that. It's something we're going to think about. But also, if you guys have anything you'd like to see on our Patreon, why don't you send us a message?
Right, because our goal is, one, connecting with you all and creating pathways for everyone to keep sharing the stories of the women we talk about, because almost every case that we talk about, the person is still missing or unidentified. And one of the things that I have seen consistently over time is that over the course of time, interest dies away in these stories. Mm-hmm. When you have a story like this one, where someone's been missing for 50 years, their family members are still looking for them, but they've faded a lot from any sort of media attention. And so we're trying to do our part here in making sure these stories are heard. And that relies on you all to help us out in doing that. Vanessa, are you ready?
I am.
It's Tuesday, May 26, 1970, and a rural mail carrier travels down Conn Road near Huntington Township, Pennsylvania. The route is long and monotonous. Sometimes miles would go between mail deliveries in this remote area in the northeastern corner of the state, Cann Road is one of those locations. It's a long dirt and gravel road twisting between two other undeveloped roads with few houses on it. It's the kind of place where vast acres of land separate houses, a place of quiet and solitude and nothing but the sound of cicadas in the summer. The mail carrier pulled up to the Cann homestead, a 75-acre farm that wrapped along the S-curve in the road. The carrier popped open the metal mailbox at the end of the driveway and dropped in the mail before looking around. The Canns had been constructing a new pond on the property, and it looked like that was well underway. Satisfied that the delivery was safely made, the carrier headed off to the next stop. It was 10:15 a.m. Within days, the remote farm on Cann Road would be flooded with sheriffs and search teams. Cars would line the roadway, and men would be getting into their scuba gear to search the ponds.
Okay, so 75 acres is huge. Mm-hmm. So is this really way out in the middle of nowhere, or is it?
Yeah, so even now, this is not a paved road, as far as I can tell. And usually what I do is I do a little Google Street View of places.
Yeah.
There is no Street View option.
Really? So even the entrance to the main driveway would be on a dirt road?
Yes.
Okay, so it's way, way, way.
It's way. Even the roads near this road are not available on Google Street View. That's how isolated it is even now.
Okay, so this farm is completely out in the middle of nowhere, and we're about to learn why we're getting ready to go into ponds with scuba gear?
Yeah, one of the things about this story is this isolation is a key component of this story. I think it's a critical component to understand what's going to happen.
Okay.
So let's get into who is missing. Because if you wanted to, you could draw a line through Ilonka Harless's life. There was everything before she met Charles Cann, and there's everything after. And it's a turning point you can only really see from a distance, one that Ilonka herself was likely unaware of until well after they met. In the before times, Ilonka spent her childhood with her younger sisters Anita and Lorraine in rural southern Ohio. She had been born in Germany in 1948 to Clinton and Renat. Clinton was a World War II veteran, likely stationed in Germany after the war, where he met his wife. And Ilonka had been born in Germany, but they'd moved to Ohio when she was young. She'd attended Andis Elementary School, where she'd been an honor student from the start.
So he's American and Renat is German?
Right.
Okay.
Yes. His family's from West Virginia. She's from Germany. They're all living in Ohio. Now, things were not really easy for the family. Clinton was disabled after his military service, and the family seemed to have lived on a fixed income. But Ilonka was used to helping out wherever she was needed. And it was clear that Ilonka was a hard worker with credentials like being a member of the National Honor Society and in the Girls Athletic Association. So it's not surprising that she was accepted at Morehead University in Kentucky and started there in the fall of 1966. Now, the university, it's not too far from home, but it's really enough for her to gain some independence and pursue her education. And that's where she met Charles. And the couple started dating. And before she could probably even comprehend what was happening, she was married with a baby and living on a farm in rural Pennsylvania.
And this is during college?
She actually leaves college to become a wife and a mother. So her college dreams were definitely on hold.
Okay.
Now, Ilonka had grown up on a farm. In fact, her fondest childhood memories were helping her father do the chores, but living in Pennsylvania was a difficulty she was not prepared for. The Cann farm, again, is 75 acres. It's fields, it's woods, it's ponds, and while it was certainly beautiful to view, the isolation could be wearing on anyone. Most days, Ilonka stayed home caring for their son, Charles III. So I just have to warn you, there are 3 Charleses in this story. Charles Sr., the Charles she is married to, and Charles III, the baby.
The baby. Baby Charles.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, her husband, he would go to his job as a shop teacher at Berwick Junior High School. And even if she had wanted to go anywhere, she couldn't. They only had one car that Charles would have with him all day at work. And while the neighbors had been friendly and she had formed some friendships with them, it was really hard to keep and maintain that at a distance because walking down the dirt road wasn't easy in the best of circumstances and certainly even more difficult with a young child in tow. Now, people often complain about their in-laws, but few had in-laws like Ilonka's. according to Ilonka's sister, Anita, Charles's parents didn't seem very happy about the relationship at all and hadn't even wanted to go to the couple's wedding that had been held in Ohio at Ilonka's parents' house.
Do we know why?
Yeah, I think this has not been explicitly said, but they are not thrilled with this situation.
Did he quit college maybe to start a family?
So from what I can tell, he is slightly older than her. So she completes 2 years of college, so it's highly likely that he completed college.
So it's not anything to do with that.
There's a lot of tension here, and specifically around her father-in-law, because Charles Sr., I'm going to refer to him as Charles Sr.
Okay.
Charles Sr. split his time between New Jersey, where his wife lived, and Benton, Pennsylvania, where he had a trailer that he stayed in while he was up in Pennsylvania. Charles Sr. had also been a teacher, though by the time Ilonka had married, he was retired and he was working as a substitute over in a different school district, the Benton School District. So teaching was kind of part of the family profession.
Kind of an unusual way of splitting his time between where his wife lives and where he works.
Yes.
And then they live where he works in that same area.
So they are close by. This is about a distance of 10 miles between where he was living and where they were living.
Okay.
Now, Charles Sr. can only be described as difficult, and he had a habit of dropping by the Cann house whenever he felt like it, rarely giving notice or warning. Now, that situation has to be incredibly frustrating, but it was how both men treated her that had her questioning her marriage itself. The two men, her husband and her father-in-law, would often make decisions together, cutting her out of the conversations completely. At one point, Charles III had been sick, and she had wanted to take him to the doctor, but her husband and father-in-law had vetoed that idea, insisting that he didn't need to go at all. Instead, they blamed her for Charles being a fussy baby.
Okay. So she's like, this baby's sick. And they said, no, you're making him fussy.
Right.
Okay.
Ilonka didn't tell everyone what was happening inside her marriage, but there were clues that Ilonka was scared of both her husband and her father-in-law. Once, she'd sent her mother a packet of seeds in the mail and included a note begging her not to mention the small gift in case it made her husband angry. And, it's not always easy to see what's happening inside someone's marriage, particularly when the public face of it is different from what's happening in private. But there was someone who had seen what their relationship was like, even before the couple ended up on that isolated farm, and it was Ilonka's roommate, Patsy. Patsy and Ilonka had roomed together at Moorhead, and she'd seen the aftermath of some of their encounters. There was a time, Patsy said, that Charles had thrown Ilonka into a cold shower and then made her walk the mile back to her dorm room in the cold because he'd been angry with her. And he'd also been suspicious of her activities and had hired a private investigator at some point while they were in college to follow her.
It seems strange. Why would he even want to pursue marrying someone who he doesn't trust at that level?
Yeah, I think in a lot of domestic violence situations that we've talked about frequently on this podcast is there's that measure of control, right? He doesn't trust her, but he wouldn't trust anyone. And so he's just constantly monitoring her.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's very clear that behind the scenes, Ilonka was scared, and there was likely good reason for her to have that fear.
Mm-hmm.
On Monday, May 25th, 1970, something told Renat to call her daughter. I just had a strange feeling, she said later. I don't know why. I told my husband, I'm going to call Ilonka. And as soon as she heard my voice, she started to cry. The day before had been Ilonka's second wedding anniversary, and instead of hearing her daughter's happiness, she was instead confronted by what she would later describe as Ilonka's feelings of being homesick. Renat remembered Ilonka saying, "Mummy, I love you so much. I miss you so much."
That would be really hard as a mom. Did her parents have any discussions about this?
Yeah, I mean,
situation, because she's still so young too, right? Mm-hmm. It's really hard for them. She's an adult, but then she sounds like she's definitely in trouble somehow.
Right. I think to emphasize the point here, Ilonka at this point is just 22 years old, right? She's a very young mother. She's separated from her mom. It is not easy for her to get anywhere, let alone back home. And so part of the conversation that had been happening had been, yes, Ilonka was going to come home for a visit. And she was planning to come in June after school let out and bring the baby with her. But kind of behind the scenes, there seemed to be another plan taking shape. And that is that Ilonka had been talking about the possibility of leaving her husband. But everyone knows that Ilonka's at risk in this situation. She doesn't have money. She doesn't have transportation. This is a tricky situation for her to navigate. So her parents had been talking about sending bus fare to one of the neighbors that Ilonka could access that money without her husband knowing about it and get away without him having a clue what was happening.
Yeah, that would be really difficult because if he's that controlling, he might not allow her to go visit, right?
Right. So we don't know how much he was limiting her everyday life, but just the fact of the house itself being so isolated was a natural setting for him to cut her off from people. Because it's one of the things that kind of continues to happen in a lot of relationships that have abuse in them is isolation. And it's just the physical landscape itself provides a lot of that.
Right.
Now, the phone call that day probably felt like a culmination of all of the months before when Ilonka had been expressing she was unhappy. She had been writing letters about her marriage falling apart, and in it, she also detailed the way her father-in-law's presence in her life just wasn't working for her. So, yeah, her loved ones were like, it is time for Ilonka to come home. That phone call, though, would be the last time her parents heard from her. The next night, on May 26th, Ilonka's parents received a surprising phone call. It was Charles Sr. He wanted to let them know that Ilonka was missing and had been missing for at least several hours. This was something they probably could not comprehend. They had just spoken to her the day before. They had had a conversation about Ilonka coming home. So how was it possible that she was now missing?
Right. It doesn't make sense at this point in time because, one, you said she doesn't even have a car or any way to leave the farm.
Yes.
And then on top of it, she already was putting this plan into place with them.
So why would
you?
Yeah. So they panic and they make their first phone call. And within minutes of hanging up with Charles Sr., they're calling Clarence Odell, who is the mayor of Berwick, Pennsylvania, which is one of the closest towns to the farm. And they told them that their daughter was missing. And then they begged him to do anything possible to help find her. After they hung up, Odell, the mayor, did what he could. He called the state police barracks to check in on what was happening for the search for Ilonka. There's a problem. No one had reported her missing.
So Charles Sr. told her parents that she was missing, but didn't call the police.
Right.
Okay.
So this is the first time the police are hearing there's even an issue.
Is baby Charles missing too?
No. Baby Charles is not missing.
Okay.
Now, by the next morning, Ilonka's parents were on the road to Pennsylvania, and they're determined to make sense of this phone call that they'd received and find out what had happened to their daughter. And this is a search they would spend the remainder of their lives doing.
So we're going to find out what was up with her husband, Charles?
We are, because on May 27th, 1970, this is the day after she's said to have disappeared.
Okay.
Her husband, Charles, makes his way to the Shikshini barracks of the state police to report Ilonka missing. When the state police asked why it took him so long to come in, Charles said it was because he thought you had to wait 24 hours before reporting someone missing. So he'd waited until that afternoon, precisely that amount of time after he returned home to find her missing. So Charles said that the day before, he'd left for work as usual, leaving the farmhouse between 7 and 7:15 in order to be at his post at the Berwick School District. Ilonka had been home when he departed.
Okay.
He said after work, he drove home and got in around 3:30 to 3:45 p.m. He said the mail was inside and Ilonka should have been home. Instead, as he walked through the house, he heard his 15-month-old son crying upstairs. Charles III was still in his crib, dressed in his night clothes still, and wearing a dirty diaper. Ilonka, though, was nowhere in the house. Concerned by this, Charles called his father, Charles Sr. Now, Charles Sr. had come up the day before from New Jersey and was staying in his trailer in Benton, so he hurried right over and arrived around 4:30 p.m. Charles said they searched around the house and the property, but they couldn't locate Ilonka. They did discover, though, that $180 was missing, and this was money that had been set aside to pay for fertilizer. Charles said that he and his father drove the baby the almost 2 hours drive down to Hackettstown, New Jersey that night. They left him in the care of his grandmother.
Okay, so the baby's there, and they think she took $180, but she still doesn't have a car, right? So understand where they think she would have gone.
So that's the question, right? Where could she have gone?
Right.
Now, the next day, after getting back from New Jersey, Charles just goes back to work as usual. And when he's finished up his day, he drove to the sheriff's barracks to make his report. By then, that 24 hours had passed from the time he said he got home to the time he made the report. It had been even longer since anyone outside the Cann family had made contact with Ilonka.
So he's just waiting the 24 hours, going to work, dropping the baby off with his mom you said over 2 hours away?
Mm-hmm.
And in the meantime, his dad called Ilonka's parents.
Yes.
Just so many things don't add up.
Right, so it's some weird maneuvering. Now, at the center of this story, though, is the question of what you were getting at before, Vanessa. What would bring this 22-year-old Ilonka to abandon her baby in a remote farmhouse hours before anyone else would be home?
And how, right?
Yeah.
But on top of it, why?
Yeah.
What would cause her to do this?
And so in answer to that, her friends and neighbors said nothing would drive her to do this.
Right. So nothing's going to drive her to do it, and she has no way of doing it.
Exactly. No, because even though she's a very young mother, everyone recognized her devotion to her son. Patsy Allen, again, her roommate, later said she never would have walked away from her baby or caused her parents such turmoil.
No, that's a good point, because why would she want her parents to think she's missing?
Exactly. And her sister Anita also said later, I know she could not hurt anyone like that. I know that she was just in love with that little child. That baby was her purpose. Now, her devotion to her child was so much a part of witness testimony in her case file that it's likely filled with statements about her dedication to her son. And as news of Ilonka's disappearance reached the local community, neighbors found themselves pondering where Ilonka could be. They would apparently stop each other to gossip at the grocery store or over coffee. And Iris Hallett, who lived only a few miles from Ilonka at the time, she spoke recently to reporters about it. Everyone said she was a good mother, Iris said. I think someone said that she ran away to New York, but no one believed that. Because even though Ilonka was new to this community, no one, it seemed, thought she would have left on her own. Now, the search for Ilonka takes off pretty quickly. So first of all, they put up posters with her picture on them, and those went up at the 2 local bus stations just in case she had actually made it there and had run away. But it seemed unlikely Ilonka could have gotten there on foot, given the distance and the terrain. Also, no one reported seeing her at those bus stations.
Did anyone say how long it would have taken her to walk there?
I'm not sure, though. This is quite a distance from the farm there. Now, the search started to focus on areas closer to home, and within days, the state police descended on the farm and they searched the surrounding acreage on foot, looking for signs of Ilonka. Meanwhile, a Scranton police dive team assembled in the yard, and they donned their scuba gear and they searched the 14-foot deep pond. And when she wasn't found, they used grappling hooks to see if she was down at the bottom in the water.
Okay, so that's where those divers come in.
Yeah. Now, on May 28th, they also questioned Charles Sr. In one statement, he said he had driven his grandson to New Jersey on his own. But when he was told that his son had claimed to be with him on this drive, his story changed to include him on the journey to New Jersey the night Ilonka disappeared.
So we have some changing stories.
Yes.
Has there been other things going on like this, or?
Yes, because there's another inconsistency surrounding this. And it's that the principal at Benton said that on the morning of May 27th.
That's the school that Charles Sr. works at?
Yes.
Okay.
So this is May 27th. This is the day after Ilonka supposedly disappeared.
Okay.
Charles Sr. shows up on campus. And the principal said that Charles Sr. looked disheveled. He looked unshaven. And he turned in his resignation from his job without any prior notice.
We'll be back in a moment.
So he just quit.
He just quit. And this seemed odd to the principal, how Charles Sr. is just appearing suddenly and also just suddenly departing from his job, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it seemed even stranger to the state police because Charles Sr. had told them on the morning of May 27th, he'd been in New Jersey having breakfast at his home there.
Okay. So he told the police he was at home having breakfast, but he was actually in Pennsylvania quitting his job. Okay, so does he have his son with him? Does he not? Is he in New Jersey? Is he in Pennsylvania?
Right. So there's
so that's
a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah. But those are big uncertainties because sometimes we
Yes.
talk about it and it's these little tiny details that change. This is pretty big details.
Mm-hmm. Now, this gives them pause, but they weren't certain what to do with this information, right? What does that even mean?
Mm-hmm.
And they certainly weren't certain of what to do with the information that Ilonka had told her friends that she was pregnant again.
Who told them that?
So Ilonka had definitely made some local friends.
Okay.
And had told them that she was pregnant.
And now the friends are telling the police that
yeah. And so
she's pregnant.
They're sharing that information with them, but they couldn't find a local doctor to confirm that she'd been seen, that this pregnancy had been verified at all. Now, Ilonka's disappearance is certainly strange, but it seemed impossible to piece together what might have happened. There'd been no signs of foul play at the house, like forced entry. There was no damage. Nothing was amiss in the house. So it did seem like she might have stepped out voluntarily, but at the same time, none of her belongings were missing. Not her clothes, not her purse. And again, how exactly would she get anywhere? She had no money of her own. Maybe she took this $180, right? But she also didn't have means of traveling anywhere.
I guess if they wanted to argue it, they could say that somebody picked her up.
Exactly.
She had the $180 on her. But the changing stories make that feel weird because why would you have to change your stories and why would you quit your job and all of that? I still don't even know. It doesn't make sense to me.
Right. Now, despite kind of these strange inconsistencies, and the fact that they can't really piece together what might have happened to Ilonka, they did say they felt comfortable in determining that there was no foul play in her disappearance, but they couldn't say exactly what had happened to her. Now, this investigation seems to wind down, and Ilonka's family and friends back in Ohio want to fill the gaps in the search for her. Her parents hired a private investigator, a cost they could little afford, and so the community rallied around them to help fund this expense. Using spaghetti dinners, donation jars, and other events, they attempted to cover the costs of this private investigator. But as the months dragged on with no new information, Ilonka's parents were getting desperate. They made trip after trip to Pennsylvania to talk to anyone who might have information about her, and soon those trips spread to other states as they chased any lead that they could find. But their frustration with the Cann family was continuing to grow. In September of 1970, Ilonka's father, Clinton, reached a breaking point. So this is months after her disappearance. He said that every time he tried to ask the Canns about Ilonka, they would change the subject. And so he concocted a plan. He would force the truth out of them.
So he's forcing it out of them. Is he done with the investigation and the cops and he's just going to go there and do this on his own now?
Yeah, I think at this point, the investigation really seems to have wound down. They're not getting any new leads. He's trying to get information from the Canns. They're not saying anything. So he's taking matters into his own hands.
Doesn't sound particularly safe or legal.
It definitely was not. Now, on September 21st, Clinton told his wife to drop him and one of his distant relatives, Paul Allen, off at the farm. He said that the two of them just planned to search the property and that she should return around 5 p.m. to get them.
Okay, so that's not that bad.
But instead, Clinton and Paul confronted Charles Sr., who had been there on the farm alone while his son was at work. And according to Charles Sr., both men grabbed him and then Clinton hit him repeatedly. Paul, he said, only hit him once.
Are they doing torture techniques to try to get him to spill information?
Well, next, they placed his hands behind his back and they led him into the woods where they chained him by the neck to a tree and then chained his hands in front of him. And then the chains were secured by padlocks.
So absolutely we're trying to force information out with low-level torture.
We're doing some criming.
We're criming. We are, I don't know, I gotta say though, as a parent, these are the things you want to do, I think, in this case, but they're the things you don't generally do. These are thoughts we have, not actions we take.
Well, some of us might take. Now,
Clinton is taking these actions.
A lot of this comes from Charles Sr.'s perspective of what's happening. And he says that over the course of the next few hours, Clinton and Paul threatened him using, in his words, profanity and swearing. This is that's
I don't mean to laugh because this is not funny, but also part of me is rooting for Clinton here.
Now, Clinton, he said, brandished an ice pick at one point, telling him, I'm going to push this into your guts up to the hilt.
I really do not mean to be laughing. This is terrible, but also seems like something straight out of a movie.
Yeah. I mean, I think...
That's terrifying.
It does seem very cinematic. But
it does.
Also, I think you can see what Clinton's responding to, right?
You could see the desperation Clinton is feeling right now. That is his baby, and he's going to find out what happened to her.
Yeah, so I think if we frame it that way, think about Clinton thinks that this is the moment to get answers, right?
Or possibly get his daughter back, yeah.
Now, at some point during the day, because this goes over the course of many hours, Clinton made clear what his suspicions were, that Charles Sr., having been a medic in the Navy, had performed an abortion on Ilonka. He believed that she might have died during the procedure.
Okay, and I think that was probably common. Was it still common through that time? It was definitely common in like the 50s and 60s.
Yeah, so as someone who has worked in women's health, even after the legalization of abortion, people, and that is all the way up through current era, people still have at-home abortion services.
And those can still go wrong.
Definitely. They're very risky. In response, Charles apparently tells Clinton, you think your daughter would actually allow that.
Okay.
And apparently Clinton said in response, maybe she was drugged.
Also true.
Now, this questioning continues through the afternoon, and around 3:15, they repositioned Charles Sr. and inserted a gag into his mouth. While they weren't looking, though, Charles Sr. kind of rubbed the gag against the tree, loosening his bindings. And this was enough so that when his son came home, Charles Sr. was able to shout out a warning to him.
So are Clinton and Paul still on the property?
Yes, everyone is still there. I'm imagining that they put the gag in his mouth because this was around the time that Charles would have come home from work.
Okay.
Now, Charles Sr. yells for his son to run. It's not enough time, and Clinton and Paul actually grabbed for him. There's kind of a scuffle, but Charles manages to get away. And soon after, though, this leads to Clinton and Paul being arrested. Now, Clinton and Paul never denied that they'd held Charles Sr. hostage. Clinton said that he'd wanted a, quote, man-to-man talk about my daughter instead of other tales, and that he felt justified in what he had done. But Clinton denies that he had threatened him, saying that Charles Sr. had been scared enough without the threats. He also said that they had taken precautions, making sure that there was enough slack in the chains so that Charles Sr. wouldn't be uncomfortable during this captivity. He'd even used chains instead of ropes so that Charles Sr. wouldn't get rope burns, for instance.
So he was looking out for him.
Now, for his part, Paul wanted to emphasize that he had not received payment from Clinton to do this, but that he'd agreed to help him out after witnessing how poor Clinton's vision had become.
Okay.
So he was like, I can't send him off to do this.
I'm curious to see what a judge would think, because he's not saying he didn't do it.
No.
He's just saying, I tried to do it gently, but I also want to know where my kid is.
Yeah, and he was like, let's be clear, I didn't threaten to kill him. Both men they pleaded guilty to assaulting Charles Sr., but their sentences were suspended under one condition. They needed to stay away from the Cann family. And despite their efforts, the one thing they never had gotten was answers. Clinton said that the entire time they held him captive, Charles Sr. kept telling big tales.
Did they ever say what those big tales were?
Not sure necessarily what he claims happened.
Okay.
But Clinton went into that hoping to get answers, and he left not any further ahead.
Okay.
For a long time after this, Ilonka's case seems to go quiet, and Charles Sr. and his wife petitioned to adopt their grandson, placing notices in the paper stating that Ilonka had abandoned her child. Now, this is a legal mechanism, right? You're supposed to post notice in papers like this to make people aware. But nonetheless, that really had to be painful for those who loved her to see that.
Because she didn't abandon him.
Yes.
In their minds.
Yes.
Yes.
Now, in a 1978 follow-up article about her disappearance, the police reported trying all sorts of investigative angles to try to find her. They'd even turned to psychics, one of whom had directed them to a location that resembled an area nearby, and they had searched that location without success. Again, for the longest time, her disappearance had been categorized as one that occurred without foul play. But when the reporter directly asked Trooper Robert Derwent about that, all he would say is, quote, interviews with friends and neighbors and acquaintances all indicated she would never have left her year-old baby unattended. In 1993, Ilonka's parents, who were living in Kentucky, received word that the search for their daughter had been reopened. They were surprised by this news, and Clinton told reporters, it came as a big surprise. We've been hoping more now, but like I told my wife, let's not get our hopes up too high. We're going into it with an open mind. They shared that a neighbor had told them that they had witnessed a car on the remote road the night before she disappeared. The neighbor had said it had been light in color, driving along the road at dusk, and there had been 2 men inside. Her mother told reporters that she wondered who it could be because there was little reason for any strangers to be out there on that desolate road.
So is that neighbor implying that somebody else drove along and got her? Not the 2 Charleses?
Yeah, so I think there's a question of here is who are these 2 men? And again, this goes back to exactly how isolated they are out there. In that a car that nobody recognized would be something that they would remark on, that they would keep track of.
Right.
Now, her mother never receives answers for that question of who were these people that were out there.
So that just goes away?
Yeah, so who was it? What does that mean? Does it mean anything? In 1997, Clinton passed away without ever learning what happened to his daughter. Meanwhile, life seemed to have gone on for Ilonka's husband. In 1971, Charles began a new relationship with a woman named Grace. By the end of that year, she was living at the Cann farm. But it's actually this relationship that would later give investigators one of their strongest testimonies in Ilonka's disappearance. Now, as the years have continued to pass, investigators have expressed their worry that they're running out of time because many of the witnesses are getting older, they're passing away. Their one hope is that with age would come a heavy conscience and someone would say something.
Mm-hmm.
In 2018, they renewed their appeal for information, hoping someone would come forward with word about what happened all those years ago. And in 2022, their investigation had continued. This time, they gathered at the farm once again. Even though the grounds had been searched back in 1970, they still wondered if something had been missed. This time, their objective seemed more clear. They were going to drain all the ponds on the property. What they found during the search, they kept quiet, only stating it was the next step in a long investigation.
Is that implying that something might have been found?
Yeah, they do not make clear, if anything, what they were looking for, what brought them there specifically that time.
Okay, so that's something we won't know until it's solved, if that is anything.
Yes, that's been kept kind of quiet because again, this is a changing and active investigation.
Right. It makes it different, right? We don't get to hear all of those things and we shouldn't get to.
And I think that's the thing. I think with when we're hearing stories like this, we crave resolution.
We do.
But in this case, we're still in motion.
Right.
Now, that December, so December 2022, the house where Ilonka was last seen burned down in a 3-alarm fire. The next year, Ilonka's sister Anita filed a petition to have her sister declared legally dead. This was a step that Charles had never taken, even though the requisite 7 years had long since passed. Because in many states, there's a 7-year wait period after someone disappears to declare them legally dead, and that's a key component in this story. Anita's request was granted, and the cause of death was listed as still being under investigation. But in 2024, this is when that startling new development that I talked about took place. There's a coroner's inquest that was launched into Ilonka's disappearance. While it's not unheard of, a coroner's inquest into a case of a missing person is actually exceedingly rare. Because a coroner's inquest is to determine how someone died. And that's a bit hard to do when the person is missing.
Okay, so that does lead us to believe they might have found something on that farm.
Well, so during this specific inquest, their goal is to present enough information that you can determine what the cause of what led to the death was, right? Without necessarily having the body. So there are witnesses and evidence that were presented to a jury to determine whether or not there's enough evidence to list what caused her death.
Okay.
One of the primary pieces of evidence was actually an affidavit from Grace, who's, again, the woman that Charles had lived with after Ilonka disappeared. And she signed this affidavit in 1987. Now, Grace and Charles had lived together since 1971 on the farm, and their relationship had ended in 1987. The severing of this relationship actually began a several years long legal battle attesting to the nature of their relationship and whether or not the couple was married, had a common law marriage, or whether, as Charles argued, their relationship carried any legal protections at all.
Okay.
Vanessa and I recently did a documentary about common law marriage, so a lot of this will be pretty familiar.
Right. Yeah.
Now, during the proceedings, Charles had argued that because Ilonka had never been declared deceased, he was still married to her and therefore could not have been married, common law or otherwise, to Grace. Because he's basically arguing that she doesn't deserve benefits.
Okay, so when she leaves him in 1987, is that when he brings this up? Like, you don't get anything?
Right. So this starts the proceedings. Grace is asking for support and a split of shared property, essentially. And he is arguing she does not deserve that. We were not married, common law or otherwise.
Okay.
And these legal proceedings take several years to go through. Now, the court actually ruled in Grace's favor, citing that in most jurisdictions, declaring someone legally dead after 7 years is common, and that Ilonka could have been presumed dead as early as 1977. Meaning that Charles's relationship with Grace was granted legal protections because of the amount of time they had been together. Furthermore, they said Charles could have provided at any time evidence that Ilonka was still alive, but that was something that he failed to do and present to court.
Right. It's funny. They really did never once, it seems, try to say that.
Yeah.
Like, oh, she just, she's just out there somewhere. Did they ever?
Her disappearance at this point was a big mystery, but he had never moved to prove that she was alive, nor had he moved to prove her dead.
Right. But the abandonment in the paper, just putting out this baby's abandoned instead of putting out something like to her.
Yeah. So the notice in the paper is actually an interesting one because every state and jurisdiction has these special rules. You're supposed to put a notice in the paper, and then it's supposed to be a certain amount of time between the notices.
I think a lot of the time, the point of putting that in the paper is to give that person a chance to claim their child before someone adopts it.
Yeah, so that is actually what it is functioning as.
Right.
It asked her to come forward. Now, during these proceedings, when they start in 1987, there's an affidavit that Grace signs and had filed as part of the process. In it, she stated that Charles had once told her that he killed Ilonka and that he threatened to do the same to her. During the coroner's inquest, Grace was asked if the contents of the affidavit were true, and she said she wouldn't have said it if it wasn't. She said that in a fit of anger, Charles had put a gun to her head and threatened to, quote, put me where he put Ilonka. It scared me, she said of the experience. Grace also remembered overhearing Charles and his father discussing the story of Ilonka's disappearance. They wanted to make sure they remembered it the same way, Grace told the jury. Eventually, Grace said she ended her relationship with Charles after living for years with his violence, and she escaped, she said, by going to a domestic violence shelter. Also taking the stand during the inquest were Ilonka's neighbors, 2 sisters, Anne and Susan, and they both testified confirming that Ilonka had been pregnant at the time of her disappearance, and that she seemed afraid of both her husband and his family, specifically of her father-in-law. He always seemed to be kind of grumpy and miserable, to be honest, Anne said.
Are those the local friends that we were talking about earlier?
Yeah, so I get this sense that these are the same people who had said back in the day that she'd been pregnant. Another witness was a man named Michael Zimmerman. Now, Michael remembered being in a truck with his grandfather and his mother, Pearl, and he remembered them driving by the farm when they all witnessed Charles in his pickup truck chasing a woman who was running across a field. Her face, he said, was bruised and swollen, and Michael said that his mother wanted to stop to intervene, but that her father told her that she needed to stay out of it. Horrified by what she had witnessed, she actually wrote a letter about the incident, but she never sent it because she said that Charles had threatened to kill her if she ever spoke about what she had seen.
That was Pearl?
Mm-hmm.
Huh, okay.
Now, Michael said that after his mom died, he'd found the letter and that he sent it to the district attorney at the time, but he doesn't know what they did with the letter, and they can't seem to find it either. As part of the coroner's inquest, Charles was called to the stand. His attorney, Peter Paul Olszewski Jr., said, "For the past 50 years, Mr. Cann has cooperated 100% with investigators, has answered questions, and in no uncertain terms, he's invoking his Fifth Amendment right." When Charles was called in front of the jury, he did just that, saying, "Under advice of my lawyer, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege." And for every question he was asked after that, he issued the same statement. Later, his attorney said, "There's no body, no crime scene, no weapons, no witnesses, no statement by Charles to police that he was responsible, no statement by anyone to police that they saw anyone harm Ilonka."
So Charles actually never ever made a statement about it? Her husband?
Yeah, so they bring him in front of this coroner's inquest, and he's legally obliged to be there, but he just takes the fifth on every single question. Now, for me, though, it all comes back to a very small detail from the beginning, and that's at 10:15 a.m., a mail carrier stopped at the Cann house and left mail in the box. This mail was later found inside the house, and this is such a small everyday detail, but it's one that has grown in significance over time. If the mail was inside and Ilonka was the only one home, it seemed proof that she left the house later after that point, that she would have gone and gotten the mail,
Right.
brought it back in. But what if that wasn't true at all? Because that's what's been used to prove that she was home that day.
Okay.
What if she wasn't even there by May 26th? When investigator Robert Bettner took the stand, he said what I've been thinking this entire time, which is nobody could verify that she was actually alive on May 26th.
Right.
The jury deliberated for just over an hour before returning their verdict. Ilonka Cann, they said, had been killed by another person. Her death certificate would be changed to indicate that she was a victim of homicide, but the cause of death would remain undetermined due to the lack of her body. Now, this coroner's inquest is to determine what led to Ilonka's death, and by its nature, it did not make clear who had killed her. And that's why I said we're in motion.
Right. It's hard to speculate at this point.
Right.
When they're actually actively working on it.
Mm-hmm. Now, for Ilonka's family, this finding has been another step in the process in learning what happened that day in May 1970. After the inquest, Anita said, "Somebody is responsible for her death. It's not that she just walked away and left. I don't know about justice, but at least we're taking every step forward, and I'm grateful for that. I only wish my parents could be here to be part of this." Ilonka's niece, Shiloh Hagman, added, "We know she has passed. The real crime is not knowing where she is. Every day, someone wakes up and chooses to keep that information from us. Someone knows what happened." It's now been 2 years since that coroner's inquest, and as Shiloh said, someone has woken up every day since Ilonka disappeared and every day since the inquest and has chosen to stay silent. On May 25th, 1970, Renate Harless could sense something was wrong, so she picked up the phone and she called her daughter. She was right. It's now been 56 years since Ilonka went missing.
Threshold. Ilonka Cann, 22, missing since May 26, 1970, from Huntington Mills, Pennsylvania. In the fields, the mice burrow into the dark ground. There's a rustling of grass at the edge of a thicket, and the soft body of a doe emerges into a clearing, picks her way over furrows to find the shoots of grass, spring green and delicate. She stops to flick her ears, catching the tinny cry of an infant, the sound bouncing first off the flat planes of his nursery walls before leaking out the windows into this piece of edge world. By the pond, splashes of water as something takes shape in the murky depths, pushes its way through the silt onto the rough banks. The doe steps back in the deep still of the woods, her body hidden just feet inside the tree line. That's how it works out here, how easily something can disappear, even when you know it must be there, waiting.
Bye, Vanessa.
Bye, Amy.